Anyway, this is about being in DevOps and in a place where, well, there's just not very much Perl. And I know this is a Perl conference, and you're all here to learn about Perl, and I'll bet some of you actually, know the language and use it at work. So this talk is going to be rather light on Perl. Just wanted to be upfront with you. I know it's shocking. I apologize in advance for any disappointment, and I lay the blame firmly on the conference organizers for approving my talk in the first place. But in all seriousness, I'm going to tell you about how I've managed to make very good use of Perl in places where a lot of people either just don't know how to make it work or how to use it, or just like, CPAN is icky, or the system Perl doesn't support this because I'm running CentOS 5 or whatever. So, but, other than that, it's not got much Perl in it. I am a systems engineer, a DevOps engineer, I guess you might say. I work for TripAdvisor, which is the largest travel review site in the world. And I work on the data warehouse team, manage basically a ever-growing Hadoop cluster that we use for all sorts of purposes. And all that's in Java. And the TripAdvisor site is in Java. And, it's lots of Java. And a lot of our ops people, we got some great ops people, but they either don't know Perl or, they prefer Python, Ruby, and preferences are great. I prefer Perl myself, but I do them all. Though it's crazy how many people basically have never learned Perl, and they just don't like it based on what they've read on Hacker News. And, and if you give them good examples, though, they can actually see that there's a lot in there in the language, but then there are all the stumbling blocks of, well, we're running CentOS 6 still, and this module I wanted to use, didn't install because CentOS 6 doesn't deploy CPAN and whatever. But, when you're automating things, you're collecting info, you're building, little like UIs and web interfaces and all that. You can do it with, with Ruby and Python, and sometimes, Perl is just a stronger tool, and sometimes it isn't. So it's not always the best tool for the job, and it's a judgment call. So let me get on with it. Maybe we'll talk a bit more about the psychology of using Perl in a place where everybody says they don't like Perl. Oh, and the few people who do say they like it, unfortunately, are coding like it's 1995. The main thing is to solve some of the issues that people have right up front. And as a system administrator, I usually have the power to do that. But even if you're not a system administrator, I think there are a lot of tips here that will help you out, either in coercing the other sysadmins or just working around, what seems to be fixed already, fixed or broken, I guess. So these are valid reasons that people, avoid using Perl. No C compiler is available for doing XS-based, modules, installing those and using them. Worry about breakages and CPAN dependencies, which there are all sorts of ways to resolve that. Or not wanting to require users to even have CPAN, or they don't have, where they're going to deploy or develop, don't have access over the internet, or worst of all, Red Hat or CentOS-based systems where, it's either got an ancient version of Perl, Perl's compiled in a funny way that breaks things in just baffling, frustrating ways. Missing core modules from the base install and, things like that. In fact, I recently discovered that a minimal install of CentOS 6, I think, doesn't even have Perl installed. Like if you do a very minimal installation. And if you just install Perl, you don't get the CPAN client. But we have solutions. So the simplest fix that you've probably heard about, and if you haven't, I'm telling you now, it's called Perl Brew, and it's made of rainbows and awesome sauce, and it contains ninja monkeys that fly out your screen and make you a superhero. What it is, if you don't know, is it's a tool that you can use to download and compile whatever version of Perl you want into your home directory, into a folder in your home directory. And you can do multiple versions of Perl and switch between them with a command. It works with your shell, and it's insanely easy to use. Basically, you know, you can just download it as a one-liner and run it through bash. It's actually mostly shell code, and that's how it works in your shell and manages your path and Perl 5 lib and things like that. So, you know, you install it, you source this bash RC, you can put that source line into your own, you know, .bash profile or .bash RC, and the docs are really clear if you go to perlbrew.pl. And so once you've done that, you tell it, hey, I want the latest version of Perl. You can actually do in Perlbrew install Perl-latest, I think, is how it's structured. And then you know, you can install as many different versions as you like and switch between them using Perlbrew use. And that's just for that shell session. But if you want to kind of make that like the default, you know, a particular Perl, you can do Perlbrew switch. And like I said, the docs are really good. So something that I usually recommend, you know, to get to details of usage, if you do Perlbrew install cpan-m, it installs a cpan minus cpan client. It's an alternative to the cpan command built in, you know, that gets bundled with Perl. And installing it this way helps keep you from shooting yourself in the foot when switching between Perls and maybe if you're already using something like local lib, which actually I don't really recommend doing unless you really kind of know what's up, what's going on. So, and I'll talk about cpan minus a little later. So, you know, you go, you install another, you can install as many as you want, switch between them. It's really simple. And if you use the cpan command after doing like a Perlbrew use, then the cpan command will install everything into that Perl's libdirs. So that one of the problems with local lib, which is actually a few slides later, I'm getting ahead of myself, but with using local lib and then using Perlbrew, and cpan minus will automatically use local lib even if you don't have it, if you're just using it. One of the problems is that what happens is if you're switching between Perls and you're installing using just plain old local lib, then you end up with modules compiled against different versions of Perl in the same library dir. That's kind of bad. So using it this way, and if you did the install cpan-m, you know, if you want to use cpan minus instead of the regular cpan command, then you can you know, you can install and they'll stay with the Perl they were compiled for. With excess modules, I mean, it's just such a headache when they get mixed. You know, but basically, you know, you can test your code or your modules or whatever dependencies you have on whatever Perl you're gonna be deploying on if you want. And it's very flexible. It is a true power tool. You know, I mean, the only downside is that you got to install things separately for each version of Perl. But like I said, that's a necessity because you have compiled code that version of Perl, and if you mix them, gonna have a bad time. You know, you don't have to install it in your home directory. If you want to share with the rest of the system, you can install your brewed Perls under /opt. And later on, I'll give you another way that you can install custom Perl under opt. But this is, you know, this is one of those simple things that you can just do. You can test it out, you know, if you set those environment variables, run the install, then it'll put everything under opt. And again, you tell everybody on the system to source the bash RC under that opt Perlbrew directory. So I mentioned cpan minus, and I mentioned it because I really like it. It's got some capabilities that the standard cpan client doesn't have, or only recently obtained in the last couple of years, and you might not have a cpan client that new on your system. And I might add, as an aside, if you don't already know this, okay, on your system Perl, using sudo to install modules with cpan will inevitably end in tears. So try not to do it. And this is why local lib came about. It's why Perlbrew is so nice to use. But also, I'll tell you about another thing that you can use to create like RPM or D packages so that you don't end up with things where something you install via CPAN conflicts or clobbers something installed with the system Perl. Or at least you can back it out because it's an RPM. Let's see. So, yeah, one of the reasons that I like using CPAN-M is that it's a one-liner install. There aren't any dependencies. They're all packed into the script itself. And if you're on Red Hat and the CPAN command isn't even there and you're not the sysadmin, so a project I did at work written in Perl, I had people who basically, I had a quick little build script that ran CPAN to install all the dependencies for the project and using local lib and whatnot, and they couldn't do it because on the host they were trying to build on, they didn't have CPAN and they weren't the sysadmins, or they just didn't want to be effed with it. So yeah, I'll kind of revisit this. This is how easy it is to get CPAN and install it, CPAN minus. So, but like I mentioned, CPAN minus has local lib built into it, and it'll use that. So what happens is when you run this, if you don't already have a local lib, it'll initialize it. So here's the warning. It'll initialize the local lib, install itself in there. And like I said, local lib is useful, but I just told you about Perl brew. And if you combine local lib and Perl brew, you're going to have a bad time. So that's why Perl brew has its own special separate CPAN-M that you can install. I'll be putting these slides up on SlideShare too, so the links and things, you can see all that later. And I might add, I believe Perl brew uses local lib internally anyway. It sets the same vars, and so if what happens is if you're using local lib already, it's in your bash RC to activate your normal local lib, and then you use Perl brew and they collabor each other, and yeah. So you just choose the tool that's best for the job in your case. So despite all that gotcha though, CPAN minus can do some really cool things. I mean, never mind the one-liner install and the lower memory usage than the standard CPAN client. You can download that file instead of just piping it into Perl. You can download that file, set it as executable, pack it in with your application. It can also do things like you can do CPAN-M, and if you got a makefile to PL or a build PL in your application's root directory, which you really should, then it can install that. And it's got a new feature recently where it can work with something called Carton, which is what I'm going to tell you about next. So Carton is like, when Miyagawa presented this a couple of years ago, I forget if it was, I think it was in Asheville, and I had been talking to another Perl hacker about wanting to just be about bundling all of the dependencies up, the specific versions of the CPAN distributions with the application, and then just having some sort of build thing that could just install them all from there in a local lib that's actually like, either in the source directory, you could, make it git ignored, and just, have everything in one so that you can install it all in one shot, not have to round trip to the CPAN and things like that. And I had been playing with some ways to actually trick CPAN-M into doing that. And we were talking about this not 5 minutes before Tatsuhiko Miyagawa does a lightning talk on this thing called Carton, and our jaws hit the floor. If Perl brew is ninja-powered awesome sauce, Carton is rainbow unicorns delivering magically delicious vegan bacon directly into your mouth on demand. When it comes to deploying applications to users, it is indispensable. And I write code for people all the time that they just want to at the want to run make or something like that. Just run a single script and then start hacking on it or use it or whatever. So, and this way it's deploy and go. So, I just took this right from Carton's Perl doc, but basically you put your dependencies into this one file called the CPAN file, and you usually want to check that into your source tree, and then you can do carton install and it'll install stuff, and you can do carton exec and it'll set up the Perl 5 libdir to run everything in the local lib directory that it made for just your application's dependencies, so they don't mix with the system's dependencies, which again, really nice. And of course, you can mix this with Perl brew for even more isolation between applications that might be running on the same server. Let's see. I'm reading my notes, wondering if I missed anything, but I think I just, yeah. So now, I don't know if any of you have thought of this. Where's the potential problem? Anybody? Yes? You can do that, actually. That is part of Carton, and just look in the docs. It tells you like it's in there, And what I was thinking was a kind of a chicken and egg problem in this case, because for users to install something that you've packaged up with Carton, they kind of need Carton. So, and if you want them to not have to bother with much, if you want them to just be able to do it and not curse out Perl because it's so complicated. I know, I work with Java hackers, and they complain that installing stuff with Perl is complicated. Well, cpan-m to the rescue. cpan-m now has cpan, what is that? cpan file code, handling code built in, and so you can use cpan-m to do that. And so, like I said, download cpan-m, just commit it in your source, maybe wrap it into a shell script that uses cpan. Go up to the cpan instead of just being strictly internal. But the flexibility, and a cool thing is that it's the same guy who wrote both of those, Tatsuhiko Miyagawa, and he is the man. So much of his stuff that I've used, I'm just so pleased with. He writes good code and usable utilities. So whenever you see his name on something, it's probably going to be pretty good. Oh, and by the way, ironically, as I made this slide and was writing my notes, that's when somebody in the keynote was like, by the way, I want everybody to give Miyagawa a big hand. And I was like, wow. So, we ready for more? Okay, am I going too fast, by the way? Because I'm actually kind of tearing through my slides. I have a tendency to do that. Okay. So let me talk about the next amazing power tool, which, yes? Yep.
So once, so you have all your dependencies in your home directories figured out and everything works fine.
Yep.
So 2 months down the road, you want to deploy this to a production server.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not so easily relocatable.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same stack of modules.
Right.
So would Carton be that tool to use for that purpose?
Well, yeah, I mean, the modules will install under what's called a local lib, except that local lib, it will not be the default local lib, that when you usually use local lib, it just makes a /perl5 directory in your home dir and installs everything under there. It'll be actually in your applications directory. Or I think you can configure it to install them wherever you want, really. And I mean, you still need a Perl to run things on, but again, that's what Perl brew is for if you're not going to use the system Perl, or you could make your own RPMs, which I'll describe a little later. And I've got a little tool up on a little thing up on GitHub that you guys can download and use and tweak for that regard and for that sort of thing. So does that answer your question? Yeah. No, it's again, you do want the Perl in the same place. In deployment and in development, which is why I also recommend to people do things with opt Perl, because some things can be funny, But the actual cpan deps from your cpan file that you install using Carton, they should be fine wherever you put your application. It'll be just fine. Yeah. So. Yes. Yeah. That's one of the things I really like about it. Like, oh, say an application I wrote with Modulicious that then broke about 6 months later because of, now, Modulicious actually has a pretty good development policy and deprecation policy, but they move fast, you know? So anyway, the next thing I want to tell you about is Fatpack, which, you know, what's the best way to, who here's used Fatpack? Who here wrote Fatpack? Yep, there he is. I thought I saw you there. So you'll appreciate this description. If you positively, absolutely must kill every mother-loving dependency in the room, except no substitutes. And it's really simple to describe. It figures out all the pure Perl dependencies in your program and packs them into your program into a single file that your users can just plain execute. And they don't need to install anything from CPAN because it's already in the file, with the one caveat that as long as it's, pure Perl, you know. But this is how simple it is to use. And I use it all the time because I write all these little tools and utilities for users who, again, don't need to bother with that. And if I can put the tool in a single file, I have this one thing that actually runs on all of our systems, and it parses, it scans a whole bunch of system stuff for the disks. So in our Hadoop nodes, each node has like 12 data disks, and you know, they could be different sizes, they could be varying degrees. They're all connected to a Dell RAID controller, even though they're not RAID. It's like JBOD, but Dell insists that they ought to be RAID something. And so what this does is it parses the output from the report tool that gives me all of the storage info, and then it correlates that with information under the system to find out which drive is in which bay, because when a drive moves and it says that you know, disk number 5 is dead, it may not be in bay number 5. You know, or dev SDM has issues and it may not be in bay number 12. You know, because things get renumbered, and so it's an insanely useful tool. But I had these dependencies that I used to make it better, and then I Fatpacked it, and that's, you know, what we run on all our systems. It's just that simple. You know, CPAN- uses it, so if you look at CPAN-'s source code, you can see how they use it. If you look at the CPAN-M script, it's all packed in there. So, but you know, in short, you can use the CPAN to develop. Hallelujah! But you don't have to make your users, you know, use it. And this is the only caveat that I've got, is that Perl, and you know, if it's not, you know, I mean, granted, you're going to have portability issues anyway if users are, say, running an ancient, you know, operating system or something sufficiently different, or Mac OS or whatever. So, you know, for Fatpack and for local lib and so many other things, you know, MST++, and since he's at the back of the room, you know, now you know what he looks like. Buy him a beer or 4. So since I mentioned Fatpack, if you absolutely need, you know, compiled code in there, there's a thing I've used called PAR. I actually don't know how it works on the newest Perls, but I've used it on up to, I think, Perl 5.14, and you know, it's really kind of cool because you can take that compiled code and you can pack it into an executable file. It makes an actual executable, not a script. And well, it can do all sorts of things. And you know, I don't have any example slides because I didn't have any Wi-Fi when I was doing these slides, and I always have to look at the docs anyway when I use it. I don't use it very often. But when I do, it's very useful. You can even pack Perl into it, you know, into your executable, which I don't think I've had the opportunity to use, but it's like, so let's say you're sending this to somebody who won't even have Perl, like, because they're on Red Hat 7. They don't need it. Let's see. There is a bit of a performance hit because of the way it has to unpack everything and kind of, you know, hook into ink, and, you know, but again, if that's what you need, you know, then it's very, very powerful. You know, and the basic usage really isn't that hard. And oh yes, okay, in my notes here, the one amazing thing, I've never done this, but because of who wrote this, I believe it can work. You can take binaries compiled against multiple architectures and pack them into the same executable. And so, you know, if you got a system with, an old glibc and a newer glibc, and you can actually link against both of them and pack that in there. I don't know how it does it. I've never done it, but wow, cool. Audrey Tang is the brilliant mastermind, one of the most amazing hackers, and she has written so many cool things. I actually use another one of her things. I think it's like use lib, or I can't remember what it is, but I've used it on a couple occasions. And she's also one of the nicest people you ever meet. So I've never met her on IRC. She's just awesome. It always amazes me when people are that smart and that nice and write incredible code too. So I am one of the things that people frequently want to do. Sometimes, just mucking with the system. Some people want everything in a package, and in RPM or depackage. And I've done that on a couple occasions. This one application that I wrote that other people actually really liked. It was a big hit and in the company. It's also on GitHub too. Please don't look at the code. But people at work really glommed onto it. They actually looked at it and they're like, I didn't know Perl could be like this. This is pretty good. But the thing is, there were some people who were like, yeah, so I wanted to hack on it, and I tried downloading it on my system, and it won't run because it says it needs Perl 5.10, and I don't know how to do that. And so I had to figure out how to actually build an RPM to give to them because I don't know if this is before I knew about Perl Brew, or I had trouble making Perl Brew work because it was still new at the time. So I did this like 2-3 years ago. So what I did was I just created a .spec file for RPM build, so you can build an RPM from that. There are other ways to build RPMs of Perl, and also if you're on newer versions of CentOS or Red Hat, there's this software collections library where you can get some newer versions of Perl, but you're not going to get 5.22 or something. But if you go to that link, and again, I'll have these notes up on SlideShare, so you can find the link and click it. Basically, there's a shell script and this spec file, and if you put them in the same directory and run the shell script, it will basically download the Perl sources for the version specified in the spec file and build Perl in a way that seems to be pretty well compatible with Red Hat systems. And when you install that RPM, it installs under /opt/Perl - whatever version you've got. And so it's isolated from the system, and you just direct your users to use that or whatever, because messing with the system Perl is bad mojo. And for modules, though, yeah, you could write a spec file for every module you're going to use, but that sucks. That's gonna suck. You could use CPAN Plus to build RPMs, right? Yeah, sometimes it works, but CPAN Plus is sadly demised. And so, and there are a bunch of other ways to build RPMs, but I have one that I've fallen in love with, and it's called FPM, which, if you're being polite, stands for Fine Package Management. But on the docs it says effing. It really supports building packages of Perl modules really well. That's why I put the link to the wiki page on Perl packaging with FPM, because it's got its own page and it explains everything and it just works. And so let's say you've installed that opt Perl, and it's you've installed that opt Perl with the RPM, and you want to continue to install things with RPMs like the CPAN files that you depend on, or even diss you made in-house. So just use FPM, and basically tell it where they're supposed to install, and it'll do it, and it works, and it's gorgeous. It really is very, very useful for deployment, because what I can do then is I put all the RPMs up in our local Yum repo that we use for deployment and things, and then I tell Puppet I want this installed on all my hosts, and Puppet knows how to do that. So that's rather nice. And it works with lots of other languages. It works with more than Perl. It does Ruby. It does Python. You can use it to make an RPM from just the contents of a directory, if you want, which something that occurred to me was, maybe you could just do that, like use Perl Brew to build Perl, and then use FPL. You probably could. It'll probably work. I haven't tried it, but feel free to email me or something if you try it. So, excuse me. So I'm amazed that I've actually taken up half an hour so far, because I got to tell you, I was panicked all to hell that I really only had like 20 minutes of material when I came here. And I tried out adding more things and writing more. And I don't really have much more in the way. There are a lot of tools out there. I just covered my favorites and the ones that I use most commonly, and have really worked for me and hopefully described caveats. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm a system administrator, really. I mean, I do software development. They call me DevOps, but. I could go on about systems administration for hours and hours, and for some of you, I'm sure I have in the past. Anybody want to talk about that for a little bit? No? Sure. Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to keep it with the theme here. I am a no Perl hacker, which, like NoSQL, means not only Perl. Over my career, I found that, in order to work effectively with others, I got to do a lot of everything, a little of everything, especially as a system administrator. I got to use the right tools for the job. Sometimes, Python has some amazing frameworks, as does Ruby. Puppet is written in Ruby, and if you want to write extensions to Puppet, it's usually best to write them in Ruby, and it's certainly easiest. So I've been doing a lot of Ruby the last couple of years. But I choose what I'm working on based on a number of factors. And where I work right now, it's almost entirely a Java shop. Basically, if it runs on the JVM, we use it in production. And of course, because I'm a Hadoop admin, that's all Java, and pretty much everything involved with Hadoop is in Java as well. And so the first thing people turn to is often Java. But, it's a bit of a pain because it's not very good for scripting. And when you're a sysadmin, you do a lot of scripting. And Perl is a fantastic tool for systems administration. It has been forever. It's except for Red Hat, it's installed on every system. And the backwards compatibility and the stability and the availability of modules is really awesome. But over the years, Python and Ruby have both improved. And Perl maybe got a bad rap because of Matt Script Archive and lots of things, but and just people who don't like sigils, whatever, it's all syntax. But I've been meeting a lot of people who who know any Perl, and I got to work with them. So it's you think system administration, and I'm on a small team, and every system administrator should know Perl. It's fast, it's flexible. I'll bet there's almost 400 people in this building right now who all know Perl, and if I extrapolate that out to every building in the world, that's like 17 billion people, right? Yep. But the lack of Perl knowledge in the newer employees where I'm working, we get a lot of people right out of college. It's just kind of the nature of it. They've never even seen a line of Perl code. All they've read on Dig or Hacker News or whatever is that, it's an awful language. It's so freaking messy and ugly, And yet, when they see code that I've written with Moo or Moose, any sort of modern frameworks and using modern practices. By the way, if you haven't bought Chromatic's Modern Perl book, I really like it. I've given it to a bunch of people because to kind of get people on board and show them, what's out there. Once people see it, and they see good Perl, and they also have a good installation and development experience using things like Flatpak and other things like that, then they start to look at it favorably, especially when they've had difficulty with, using pip or easy install or a virtual end with Python or gems with Ruby, and they just suffer through it because they're like, well, it's better than Perl, and then they're like, well, it can actually be better. So it makes a big difference. If you want to get some Perl in there, just show them it's better. You don't have to, wheedle them or whatever, and, but also don't shove it down their throats either. I won't pretend it's the best language out there, and, because nothing's perfect, but, it's, it's, I don't know, I ran out of notes there. So anyway, and I don't have to keep you here. There are other talks. But I'm curious because I've been talking to a lot of people about this whole DevOps thing. Because what I've described I do is I'm a system administrator, yeah, but I also develop a lot of tools for people. We got this thing called the Hive Query tool that I built in Perl, and it took off because it made the Hive SQL on Hadoop layer easy enough for, first of all, people who didn't want to learn how to use Hadoop or didn't know much about Hadoop, but they knew some SQL and could learn Hive's dialect of SQL. They could write templates, okay? And the templates were kind of a cool little innovation in that the templating language that you use, the functions you call and whatnot within the templates actually define the web interface to give to the end user when they run the reports. The SQL reports, simultaneously with what SQL to generate based on their input from the web interface. So you only write that stuff once, and it figures it out from there. And the funny thing is, I just use some very careful design and trickery, and people have no idea that the template code is just plain, it's using text template. It is just plain Perl code. They think I designed a template language, and they like it too. So this is why it got popular and people all over the company were downloading it. But also, there's also the DevOps thing of, when doing development and management. So what does it mean to you is what I'm curious about. What do you guys think DevOps means? Actually, that's pretty good. If you weren't here, I was looking for stupid answers so I could correct everybody, but, you ruin everything, Matt. It really is. It's just a buzzword, and it's got too many different meanings to too many people. A lot of people tell me it's making the developers responsible for the operations of what they're developing. But with sufficiently large and complicated code bases and whatnot, that becomes unfeasible pretty quick. Awesome. I'm down to like 10 minutes left. And, I really actually, the one I prefer, so I said, I'm a developer, and I'm a sysadmin. Yeah, that's another one, too, that people trot out. The one I don't hear too often, but the one I think is actually most right, is that it means it means treating ops work as development work. So, your configuration, first of all, you want to automate doing the configuration, the setup of a node, and the deployment of your applications and your configuration. It must be 100% reproducible. How do you do that? Well, you check your code into source control. You use a configuration management system. You try to use tools that can automate these things, but also make sure that the tools that you use, you've automated the setup of those as well. That's the hard part. It's kind of tricky, but it's so worth it when things start to really grow. Because if I was trying to manage, 200 plus Hadoop nodes by SSHing into every box to make configurations, or even just writing shell scripts to loop it, which is what we started off doing when I got to TripAdvisor, and it was awful. And luckily, we only had about 30 nodes back then. I swear, I just carry. It just, but also, and the nice thing is, though, we make sure all of our operations people can code. That's really nice thing that they've done at TripAdvisor. It also makes it really hard to hire system administrators because So many of the ones that I've interviewed, you know, they're like, well, I don't do any programming. I was like, surely you've done some shell scripting or Perl or something, right? And then you ask them to write something, you know, relatively simple, and they stumble over something that, you know, could be as simple as just, you know, a nested loop or something. And so here's what I have to say, and it is without any humility or humbleness whatsoever. Yes. Okay? You don't have to be a rock star, okay? But you gotta be able to simple, you know, you gotta be competent at writing some simple scripting, and you gotta be able to work with source control, you know, Git, SVN, please not CVS, but okay if you must. You know, so you got to actually be able to behave like a developer and think like a system administrator. Yep.
Back in the ancient days of mainframes and front-facing classrooms,
Mm-hmm.
they had system administrators and they had system operators.
Yes.
People who you're interviewing who don't code are generally people that should be classed as
Mm-hmm.
system operators,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a low-level job.
Yeah.
So your job is to go fetch the big,
Yep.
take the tools out of the library.
You know, I interviewed somebody the other day who it was kind of sad. I don't think anybody pushed him like I did. You know, I was his third person interviewing him. Graduating with I guess a master's in IT from like Worcester Polytech, and yeah, he didn't knew some Java. You know, he knew how to write Java code, not even very well, and he didn't know any scripting languages, and he wasn't really very good programmer or problem solver, and I was just floored. I was like, wow. You know, and even people who are, you know, around my age, I've met a few who are like, yeah, no, I've been a system administrator for 10 years, but I don't code. And it floors me because, you know, you got to be able to do it if you're going to do it effectively. Anything more complicated than a lamp stack, you know, or Windows, I don't know. Actually, even our Windows guy is a programmer. He does PowerShell, C#, and Perl, actually. So, you know, that's my takeoff, okay? So part of this, to tie it all together, to do your deployment, okay, you know, RPMs and things like that, you want to write, you know, code for Puppet or Ruby. You want to automate everything so that it is completely reproducible. And, you know, frankly, if that server dies where you're doing all your stuff and, you know, you don't have everything checked into source and an automated system that can bring it back up in a few minutes or whatever, then, I mean, when the shit hits the fan, it's going to be all over you instead of, you know, and it hurts. So if you're a programmer, if you're a system administrator and you don't program, I don't hate you, okay? But I would love it if you learned how to program, because you'll make everybody's lives easier and you'll become a superhero. People think I'm a rock star, and I'm just like, nah. So, yep.
Minus name?
Yep.
This probably happened after you originally read the Ballroom documentation.
Yep.
Read it now.
Yep.
Find there is a subcommand called Ballroom lib, which handles all of the local lib integration stuff, so you can stack multiple local libs on top of the Ballroom, and it all works.
Oh, yes. You know, I actually did see that reviewing the manual last night, and I didn't look into it very deeply because I hadn't used it.
Right.
That's cool.
But the point is, it's not, you can't use Ballroom and local lib
Uh-huh.
together. You can't do it unless you read the Ballroom documentation and think.
Yep.
As ever in systems, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, there you go. So at this point, you know, I ran out of time to make slides, and I ran out of things to say, and there's only 5 minutes left. So thank you very much for coming. I hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions, by the way, you know, come up to me, ask me. Like I said, I'm going to put these on SlideShare. I think my SlideShare name is Hercynium, or you can look for my real name, you know, Steve Scaffidi. It's on the program. I'll make sure to link to it. And yeah, and if anybody wants to talk Hadoop or systems administration or anything, or even sit down and maybe write some code, yeah, I've got some ideas for things that it would be really cool to, like, you know, I didn't want to actually ask for a BOF because I don't know if I have the energy to organize that, but if anybody wants to informally, you know, hack around or experiment or learn, thank you. But I remember kind of like, reading the initial doc, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And yeah, being able to do the remote execution stuff, right. And it's funny too, Matt Trout has another